I'm back with another 10-minute-ish portfolio review. Today we'll be taking a look at Ashley's product design portfolio. Let's start with some honest first impressions. So the first things I look at usually are the case study thumbnails. This first one here, I would say for ease, is actually a little bit above average, which is really great. I don't see any major visual design flags. There's good typography and the alignment seems good. And so all of that is a very positive sign. However, the second one I would say is less good because it is a website redesign. That makes it a less strong project for product design roles. And especially for entry-level people, I kind of want to see a few different examples of projects you've done before that are related to product design. And so I would say this one is not as strong, mostly because it is a website redesign and the design itself feels a little bit more dated. Finally, this last project looks like it's an industrial design project, and so it's a little bit less relevant to digital product design. And so my biggest recommendation would be to do a couple more side projects to bolster up your portfolio and showcase more projects. Moving on to the design of the actual homepage, unfortunately, I'm not a huge fan of this card overlaying the image on the left. I think it's a kind of a personal preference thing, but it does feel a little bit cluttered and it also adds an additional element on the page. And so what I would suggest is I would suggest simplifying it a little bit so that you only have one rectangle that crosses the entire page. You can also consider creating more type contrast between the heading and the body text here. I think right now the design is pretty subtle, and because you mentioned that your designs are playful, you can try upping the contrast and also adding more weight to the title so that it stands out a little bit more like this. I think it's a little bit more playful and a little bit more fun. It also works for all the other case studies as well, and so you can kind of see a side-by-side here. Before we dive into this first case study, I want to note that I can't click this right area here. So whenever you have a case study, it's important that the person can click anywhere in the card to navigate to the case study. I shouldn't have to click directly on the image to navigate to the case study. One thing that I think this header area does really, really well is that I can really clearly see the designs. I'm very happy that I can clearly see the designs. A lot of times I will see designs here that are like rotated at weird angles or like propped onto like a random cement block, and that is not what I want to see. Here I can clearly see 4 key screens in the design, and I can really see the details that the designer put into their work. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the design of this is pretty solid. There are a couple notes I have in case you want to go back and revisit it. This gray is way too light. I can barely see it, and I have a very high resolution monitor, and so maybe consider making it a darker gray. The other note I have is this green is different from the greens here. I'm not sure if that's intentional, but if you want to make it all feel more like a family and consistent, maybe consider making it the same green. So typically what I'll do is I'll scroll through the case study really, really quickly to get an overview of what to expect. One thing I do like about this case study so far is that it doesn't feel overly cluttered. There are clear headings like this. The headings tell a story, and every paragraph is divided by a artifact for me to look at. And so I think this person is doing a great job of using visuals to tell a story, and also they use the headings to tell a story as well. A lot of times when I open a case study, it's really hard to process because there's way too much going on. And I think this one is a good balance of images with headings. I don't have to read these little paragraphs because I can tell what the story is by just skimming it like this. Some of my notes around the case study are more from a presentation aspect. So one thing I'm noticing first is that there's this heading, this heading, this heading, and this heading, and they're all the same size. I think you would benefit from having like a subheading size that's a little bit smaller. That way there's more hierarchy on the page and it's easier to follow what's important and what's not important. So for example, this is a quick mock-up, but you can make this text smaller and this text bigger so that there's more contrast. My next note is that unfortunately, I don't think this circle with the text on top is really effective. Right now, the header and the body text is kind of clashing with the background color, and it's harder to read because everything is centered aligned. So one of my suggestions would be to do something like this, where you make everything left aligned, and if you want to, you can still have a decorative yellow or blue element, but maybe make it something that's a little bit smaller so it's a little bit pop of color. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. This is just an idea, but it's really up to you how you want to approach it. I also made the text a little bit bolder and larger so that it creates a little bit more visual impact, but it's up to you how you want to approach your visual style. One thing I like about your case study is that you point out the design methods you're using in every section like this. You could consider making an interesting visual treatment for these specific elements so it's easier for me to spot them across the page. One idea I had was to do something like this, where you add a call out or add an emoji or something so that it stands out. One thing I like about this case study is these callouts for the design method that's being used in different sections. For these, you could also consider making them have a special visual treatment so that's easier to see them as you scroll the page. One idea I had would be to add like a little background color or a little emoji on the left side so that it's a little bit easier to see them across the page and it kind of creates a narrative where you can easily follow them as I scroll through the page. One of my last visual notes is that right now there are these little headings like define and research that kind of feel like lost within the abyss of all the text on the page. And so I would decide if you want these to be like headings for the section or headings for each of these titles. I think right now, because of the spacing, it's not really clear what they belong to. I know that this is like the research section from here to here, but I wonder if there's a way to visually treat it so that's a little bit more clear that that's the entire section. It feels a little bit lost right now. I think the creating concept section here is actually one of the most important sections, and I feel like it's getting glossed over a little bit because there's one big image that's kind of hard to process. So what I would recommend is making subsections within this bigger section that kind of allow me to break apart your design in detail a little bit more. So you can consider cropping this image or making sub images and stacking them on top of each other. I think that way I can more easily see your process and more easily see what you're thinking when you were creating these concepts. One cool thing you could do is you could put side by sides of this design here with the final design here. I would love to see the changes you make as long with the explanations that you have for what changes you made. Finally, in this last section, building on our previous goals, I would highly recommend separating out the designs so that I'm very clear on how you solve each of these goals. So for example, for less is more, keep it simple. What specific things did you change that follow this principle? I would love to see callouts to the specific things. I think it really helps you tell the story better. I like how the final designs are all outlined here. It's really easy to see again. I think nothing is rotated, and so it's really great to be able to see all the designs very clearly. Overall, I think the first case study was pretty easy to follow. My biggest piece of feedback would be to do more product design projects to showcase on your portfolio. I think that'll make you a stronger candidate and help you stand out amongst the sea of portfolios. If you would like to see more portfolio reviews from me in the future, please like and subscribe for more.